My name is Stephanie Helms Pickett. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Vice Chancellor for Equity, Belonging, and Culture here at Antioch University. Welcome to our webinar this evening. In June of 2024, the TRHT Advisory Committee, designated in this space with a beautiful Zoom background, attended a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Summer Institute with hundreds of other higher education staff and faculty who either host a TRHT campus center or were interested in going through the application process for such a distinguished designation. During our 4 days together, your Antioch team envisioned a concept called One Book, One Antioch. Accordingly, it would result in a shared reading experience for the community. As we continue to operationalize our concept, we landed on the idea of reading a book of one of our own. We landed on the works of Dr. Janet Dewart Bell. A member of the Antioch University Board of Governors, she is a social justice advocate, a civil rights activist, a faculty member at Baruch College in Manhattan, and a motivational speaker. She also holds a doctorate in leadership and change from Antioch University. She is the author of Carving Out a Humanity, Race, Rights, and Redemption, Lighting the Fires of Freedom, African American Women in the Civil Rights Movement, and Blackbird Singing. Among her many accomplishments are an Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement and programming for the National Public Radio, she also was honored with a Peabody Award, considered the highest award in broadcasting. As a visiting research professor at the University of Pittsburgh, she co-taught constitutional law with her husband, Professor Derek Bell. Dr. Derek Bell, now an ancestor, worked as the first Black tenured faculty at the Harvard Law School in the 1980s and is considered the godfather of critical race theory. Yet Dr. Bell, Janet Bell that is, does not live in her late husband's shadows, but continues her own work in achieving a more just society. She is the board chair for the Women's Media Center and serves on the boards of Cancer Care and the Southern Center for Human Rights. She has also served on the board of Andrew Goodman Foundation, established by Antioch graduate David Goodman to honor his late brother Andrew, who was murdered at the age of 20 by the KKK in Philadelphia, Mississippi during the Freedom Summer of 1964. I am deeply honored and privileged to introduce to you Dr. Janet Dewart Bell, who is our inaugural speaker for One Book, One Antioch, and will be presenting on her pivotal dissertation work that she authored into a book. It's really possible. They tell you that, but it is really possible. Lighting the Fires of Freedom, African American Women in the Civil Rights Movement. Our chat will be open for you to talk amongst yourselves during her presentation, but we will hold Q&A later after she is finished. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bell.
Well, thank you so very much, Stephanie. You said two things I wanted to comment on. I had not heard Derek called that he's now joined the ancestors before. That's interesting, and I love that very much. And while I don't walk in Derek's shadow, I walk in his sunlight. And we were partners, and it's just really a privilege to, number one, to acknowledge his work and to carry on the kind of work that I've done all my life. So I'm going to give a presentation, and I'll try not to get too long-winded because I get so excited about the subject, African American women in the Civil Rights Movement. But I'm going to do a little reading here, and then I will share my screen and show some slides in about 5 minutes for the rest of it. And so we'll get what I call almost a headline news approach. Clearly, we won't have time to go deeply into each of the women I interviewed, into their backgrounds, but at least I'd like for you to see the pictures of them and get a sense of what's happening. But I wanted to start first with giving a sense of the times in which in which I lived, I put myself in that time, having been born in 1946 and having been involved in the civil rights movement and other movements of the day myself. Um, During the civil rights movement, African Americans led the fight to free this country from the vestiges of slavery and Jim Crow, though they all too often were and remain invisible to the public. African American women played significant roles at all levels of the movement. Some led causes and organizations such as Dorothy Height, the president of Delta Sigma Theta sorority and the president of the National Council of Negro Women. Others did not have titles or official roles, including Georgia Gilmore, one of the cooks who organized to raise money to support the Montgomery bus boycott. These women did not stand on ceremony. That was a phrase my mother always used. They simply did the work that needed to be done without expectation of personal gain. Often unnamed and unappreciated, African American women helped construct the cultural architecture for change. They addressed the most important and volatile issues of the times, and we still do that: segregation, lynching, education, and economic justice. Even before the civil rights movement began, the crusading anti-lynching journalist Ida B. Wells Barnett tried to protect Black women from sexual violence and the antebellum and later Jim Crow tradition that allowed white men to abuse and rape Black women at will and without punishment. Rosa Parks, whose courageous refusal to surrender her seat to a white man sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, followed in Wells Barnett's footsteps. In lighting the fires of freedom, as in my dissertation, which I talked to far more people, but for the book, I focused on 9 women who are active at a range of levels in the movement about what ignited and fueled their activism. And I published their stories in their own words, with all their cadences, colloquialisms, and lyricism intact. I am honored and grateful that they trusted me to do that and allowed me to share it with you. These are real people sharing real lives. Some are now in their 90s, and unfortunately, since my book has been published, several have, as you would say, Stephanie, joined the ancestors. These women recognized and analyzed the role of race in American society and set out to make a difference. They did not seek fame or fortune. They sought a more just world for themselves, their families, their communities, their people. Clearly, the people who lived and worked in the heart of the civil rights movement, the Deep South, I call it the cauldron, were the heart and soul of the movement. Their heroic actions often put themselves and their families in harm's way. And we'll talk about a few of them when I show you the PowerPoint. With little money, no standing, and the law itself against them, African American women had to be creative, resourceful, and able to adapt. They eschewed top-down leadership, encouraging people to develop their own approaches, espousing what we now identify as servant leadership or a visionary approach to transformational leadership, built on mutual respect, creative problem solving, and understanding of the need for systemic change. As servant leaders, as we know from our Antioch training, that does not mean they were servile. They were courageous and determined. They accepted the uncertain and dangerous consequences of their lives. In a 1993 article, The Bone and Sinew of the Race, sociologist, if I could talk, Carol Marks wrote of the heroic sacrifice of Black female household workers. My mother was one of these women, intelligent, talented, and beautiful. She spent most of her life working as a maid in households or motels, not hotels, motels. Her migration to Erie, Pennsylvania in the mid 1940s, where I was born, had taken a circuitous route from a small town in Arkansas. Outside of her work life, my mother, like so many other Black women of her era, was an elegant, refined person of great vision who was viewed as a leader in the community. She was active in helping neighbors in need. She was active in our schools, which our family essentially integrated. To support my activities in the movement, she bought me a car that was better than any that she had ever owned, taking on additional work to pay for that extraordinary gift. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now, and Harold Hale is standing by just in case I don't actually do it properly. Let's see if we get this. Okay, that is the cover of my book, and this is my wonderful mother, my first and ultimate role model. She worked full time and never missed a PTA meeting. Hello. Even when it meant losing a few hours or a day's pay. As a domestic worker, there was no such thing as personal or paid leave. The wages were meager, while the abuses were legion. She, in spite of all that, challenged the power structure, writing letters to senators and other public officials about making society better. It is not that she was fearless. She worked through her fears, as many of us have to do. This is my grandmother, Sophronia McKnight, 4'11" or 4'8", where we've been arguing over for years as to how tall she actually was. And she and my wonderful grandfather raised 3 daughters in the rural South. And a story is told that when a young white male insurance agent came to collect the weekly premium, remember this was in the 1930s, he fondled one of the daughters in the presence of my grandmother. Remember, this was a time when Black lives did not matter. Grandma quietly walked over to the gun rack. In the country, everyone had a shotgun. She took a gun and deliberately shot close to the man's ear to stop his aggression. Well, he left. Then my grandparents sent their daughters away, thinking that the family would surely be lynched. But they stayed their ground. They would rather die than take low to anyone. Several weeks passed. Then another young white insurance man came by, looked at my grandmother, and said, "Aunt Sophronia," as if nothing had happened. My grandmother lived to be almost 80, with her dignity, self-respect, yes, and self-love intact. My family did not have money, but they left a rich legacy of authenticity, courage, and purpose, the themes about which I write in my dissertation, which became the book, Lighting the Fires of Freedom. And I will say that my dissertation was used in a speech a few years ago by Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Yes, she generously gave me credit. This slide here was about a rally. When I got involved in the civil rights movement, I was young and let's say not the wisest person. And I was with an integrated group, and we decided in Southern Virginia that we would go to a Klan rally to show that we were not afraid. The Klan would come in their hoods, and they would go through the Black community, particularly on the weekend, and try to frighten people. And Black people, it's amazing the courage that they have shown then and over the years. Well, after a few minutes, we were noticed, and some of the Klan members started coming toward us. and we were not as foolish as we might have seemed. We left, but as I was leaving the rally, this was about 1967, 68, um, I pulled this from a telephone pole. And if you'll see, come hear the truth, good preaching country music. Scroll down and you'll see the white public only. White so-called evangelicals have always tried to hijack Christianity, and we cannot let them do it. I'm going to show you a few other women who are active in the civil rights movement. Then I'll go to the 9 women in my book. This is Septima Clark, who started citizenship schools in the Sea Islands, where she lost her pension. She got it as she was an elderly woman after much struggle and much fight. This is the great Ella Baker, called Fundi by the young people of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Fundi, a Swahili word meaning someone who leads one generation to another. She insisted upon the independence of SNCC and that it should not be part of one of the traditional civil rights organizations, even though she had worked in several of them. This is Jean Fairfax. And what she did was she worked for a major civil rights organization, but she also, one of the things that she did was she did outplacement for students when schools were, after the Brown decision in 1954, schools in Southern Virginia refused to desegregate. So what did they do? They closed the schools for 5 years in Prince Edward's County. And what that meant was that there were no schools for Black children, but they siphoned the money from the public schools for private academies. Is any of this sounding familiar to you? You know, if we don't know our history, we are doomed to repeat it. At that time, Jean Fairfax was working for the American Friends Service Committee. And so what she did was she placed Black children, high school students in particular, who were close to graduation, juniors and seniors, in homes around the country. Homes throughout the country took these students. It was a wonderful, wonderful story of how people reached out to each other and really helped to really help sustain an education and community. And as I've traveled around the country, every now and then I run into Jean Fairfax kids. That's what they call themselves. This is Maida Springer. So we wonder, how did we get into the anti-apartheid movement? Hello, Elon Musk, who seems to still supporting that. That the American labor movement got involved in African liberation movements because of the insistence of Maida Springer. And so if you read more, all of these women, really read more about them, because she was really a titan in labor. She brought people along in terms of race and sex and international relations. This person is Molly Moon. She started the National Urban League Guild, and there's been a story about her lately, a documentary. People have rediscovered her, and what she did was she raised money to support the movement. And I like this picture because she's bougie like I am. You can laugh. This is Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, among other things, that she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Well, one of the things that she was so articulate and passionate when she spoke at the Democratic National Convention. She was so powerful that President LBJ Lyndon Baines Johnson called a fake press conference in the Rose Garden to take attention and the cameras away from her. That's how powerful this little Black woman was. And so she was beaten almost to death for trying to register to vote, get other people to vote, and trying to vote herself. A wonderful person. I include the Montgomery bus boycott here because it's a microcosm of African American women leaders and leadership roles. And so I'll mention several people here. So how was that bus boycott successful? It lasted for over a year. people were waiting. They were strategizing before Rosa Parks sat down to stand up for justice. But how did people get to work? How did they do engage in commerce, engage in their community life? It's because people like Joanne Robinson, who was a teacher at the local Black college and head of the Women's Political Council, uh, people like that had arranged for alternate means of transportation. And when there was no transportation, people walked. They walked for over a year. Now we know we can't get people to walk across the street these days. So we have to look at our rich legacy and our rich history and understand the shoulders upon which we stand. Claudette Colvin was a teenager who actually sat down on a bus, would not give up her seat a few months before Rosa Parks, but she was not deemed a sufficient symbol for the movement. And so she did not become the face of the Montgomery boycott like Rosa Parks. Georgia Gilmore. I told you my mother was a maid, a household worker. Georgia Gilmore represents those kinds of working class people, no collar people who are creative. She baked pies and cakes and things like that and got other people to do things to raise money to support the movement. And they called it a club from nowhere, but to try to add some anonymity. But of course, people knew who they were, and many people lost their jobs that paid them the meager wages that they got. And this is Rosa Parks. And the reason I say you may not know is that she was Antiochans probably know this, but that librarian back, um, that shows that she was at a training institute and integrated at Highlander, and she was trained as an activist, a nonviolent activist, as well as being a person who was the secretary of the local NAACP. And as you know, at being the secretary of the NAACP at that time was you weren't just taking dictation, you were doing things like investigating violence. In the case of Rosa Parks, she was also an anti-rape activist. That's Rosa Parks in later life. I want to mention Daisy Bates and the Little Rock Nine, these nine young people who integrated Central High School in Little Rock. And it breaks my heart to see what's happening to that school after these young people so courageously did what they did. They walked through every day in the midst of hatred. I think about the people on the Capitol who have to go to work every day with people who would do them harm. These young people had to walk through the most, and they were taunted by the most vile comments, spit upon, and what have you. But they persisted, and they managed to graduate. One young woman got separated from the nine because she didn't have a phone at the time, Elizabeth Eckford, and she had to walk through that horrible crowd by by herself, a a traumatic experience that has affected her all her life. And then there's been some news lately about Mamie Till Mobley, and whose young son, Emmett Till, was murdered. And one of the things that she did was she made this decision to have an open casket funeral so that people would know how her son was mutilated and brutally killed for no crime at all. There was no crime worthy of that kind of treatment he got from uh, those adults who came to his relatives. She had sent him down to Mississippi to visit relatives, and because he uh, the this woman said that he either whistled or called her "Hey baby." She since recanted a few years ago, as someone said, "Too little, too late," and that didn't happen. But even if it had happened, the results was not something that should have happened. That is, I wanted to show Mrs. Mobley with her son and how much love and joy the two of them had, and that sometimes we have to go beyond the symbols and really meet and really remember how human and wonderful people are. Included Constance Baker Motley in this presentation because she represented the lawyers. She was the first uh, counsel, female counsel on the NAACP Legal Defense Fund legal staff. And she was a mentor of one Derek Bell. And you see right there, there she is with two people I don't think we have to, uh, um, we, that most people know that we have to name, but I'll do it anyway. One, because it's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. Coretta Scott, an Antioch College graduate who is credited with teaching Martin Luther King about nonviolence, among other things. His teachers include uh, Howard Thurman and Benjamin Mays and others, but a lot of credit goes to his life partner, Coretta Scott. Let me see, I went backwards. And so now here, I'll go through the 9 women in the book real quickly. This is Leah Chase. If those of you who've been to New Orleans, hopefully you've gone to the Dookie Chase restaurant. And why is this restaurateur here? Because during the civil rights movement, she hosted civil rights groups, not just the big names like Dr. King and others, but young people against the laws. Her business could have been shut down at any time, and she felt her job was to feed people and give them encouragement. Her business was not shut down because the Chase family had such standing in the community. In my book, I showed pictures of people I tried to get them around the civil rights days and later in life. And so this was an early picture, and this is her later in life. When I interviewed her at her restaurant, it was for a number of hours. She just was tireless, and she was so excited to talk about her civil rights work. She said, people wanted to talk to me about my cooking because she was a James Beard awardee and things like that, and she's a renowned cook. But she said, I don't get a chance to talk about my civil rights work. And I was pleased that when she died, the headline said, a restaurateur and civil rights um, leader. And that's something I think she really wanted. And I was glad to have had the opportunity to talk to her. This is Dr. June Jackson Christmas, who never worked in the South, but the civil rights movement really encompassed nationwide. The people who were involved, like my mom, who didn't really work in the South, but who contributed to that. This is Dr. Christmas addressing a convention of the American Psychiatric Association, the day that students at Jackson State were killed that just happened to be there. And so she was consoling and trying to make some understanding of what had happened for her colleagues. This is Dr. Christmas later in life. She just died at the age of 99 in 2023. But what she was one of the first Blacks to integrate Vassar College, also Boston University School of Medicine. She not only worked for Black liberation, she worked on behalf of Japanese students. When Japanese students were not allowed to, when Japanese people were interred, she wanted to bring some of them to Vassar, and they said, "Well, you can't just have a specific scholarship for one group, right? As white male privilege always says." But so she said, "Well, what if I just say don't rely on don't call it race, but just say people who are misplaced." And they said, "Oh, okay, well, maybe we can do that." So she was instrumental in bringing Japanese American students to Vassar College. She later served as mental health commissioner for 4 mayors. But during the civil rights movement, what she did, she and her late husband, Walter Christmas, opened their home to give um, counseling, food, and a respite to people who worked in the Deep South. So it goes to show you, and this is what I encourage, that you can help at whatever level you're able to do. Eileen Hernandez was an activist at Howard University. She went from New York City to Howard on the train, and she was counseled by the wonderful Black men of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. So when she got to Washington, that she should look Washington, which was below still is below the Mason-Dixon line, that she should look for the black taxi. So she and her father get off the train and they're looking for a black taxi. They go to the taxi and they didn't see a black taxi. And the driver said, "No, you want the black taxi." This happened several times until she finally realized that, oh, the black taxi of the taxis that will take black people, others would not do it. Remember, public accommodations, transportation, all those things were segregated. And so she became an activist. She later became a labor leader as well, and a human rights leader. This is Judy Richardson, who represents the young people of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. This these young people are integrating a lunch counter. And it's the Judy spoke recently for Antioch as well, along with my friend Judy, my friend David Goodman, and she talked about those experiences. But what she did, in addition to integrate lunch counters and things, she helped run the Watts line, the wide area telephone service. And remember, we didn't have cell phones and things like that. And so people would call in at the end of the day so that they would people would know at the headquarters if they were alive or not. These were dangerous, dangerous times. Judy felt, and she's now in charge, or at least one of the people is running the SNCC Legacy Project, and she is still modest. And I had to convince her to let me interview for the book because she felt that her contribution was not significant. And I, of course, beg to differ. This is Judy later in life. After she left the Deep South, after the Civil Rights Movement, she did a number of things, started a bookstore in Washington, D.C., which at one time was the largest Black bookstore in the country. And she was the series associate producer for Eyes on the Prize, among other things. That picture of Judy was where she was speaking at an MLK ceremony in Boston, where she was living at the time. This is Diane Nash, who believed in jail no bail, who went to jail when she was pregnant. She took over the Freedom Ride after the bus carrying the workers from was firebombed, so that because she said that if we allow violence to deter us, we will never progress. So she is just a remarkable person, and she was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom just relatively recently. But she was a strategist, and she really believed in the power of nonviolence, not just as a tactic, but a way of life, as something that we all should practice. And she believed in the power of she believes in the power of moral suasion, which is hard when you live in a country where we seem to have plummeting values. But at any rate, she took over the Freedom Ride after the bus carrying the Congress on Racial Equality people was firebombed. And a remarkable story of hers. She after that, after her experiences in Tennessee, she was a student at Fisk University, and she actually was head of a student organization even before the foundation of SNCC. But later she went back to Chicago, and she became a tenant organizer. This is Kathleen Cleaver. I call her, for the young people in particular, the real Black Panther. She was the first woman who was part of their central organizing committee, and she and her husband, Eldridge Cleaver, were wanted by the FBI. They left the country for a couple years where their children were born. I interviewed her while one of her grandchildren was visiting her, and for someone to give up time when their grandchildren are visiting you from the Sudan, that's very important. That was a very big sacrifice on her part. She's one of the smartest people you will ever know. She graduated summa cum laude from Yale. Then she went to Yale Law School, and she became a law teacher. That's Kathleen Cleaver in later life. This is Gay McDougall. who integrated Agnes Scott College, which is outside of Atlanta. And she was the only Black student for 2 years. After 2 years, she felt her sacrifice was enough, so she transferred to Bennington. She then later went to Yale Law School as well, and she became an anti-apartheid leader, and so much so, and an overseer of this elections for Free South Africa. And the great Nelson Mandela asked her to accompany him when he voted for the first time. That's gay in later life. Gloria Richardson was called the Lady General of the Civil Rights Movement. Unlike Diane Nash, she did not believe in nonviolence except as a tactic. And when I interviewed her, she was still as fiery and spirited as she was for the day when she pushed away the gun being pointed at her by the National Guard. And this is her after it, when I was interviewing her, looking very interested in the fact that after 50 years, when she was condemned in Cambridge, Maryland, for her activism, that they gave her a citizenship award. This is Myrlie Evers, and I'm going to really end with Myrlie Evers, and I'm going to read just a little bit from the chapter on Myrlie Evers. The Evers home was firebombed the year before Medgar Evers was assassinated in their driveway, essentially in front of them. So let me just read this. These are her words. She said, "I was very fortunate to be surrounded by people who love me dearly." Let me go back a second and say that Medgar Evers was appointed the first NAACP field secretary in the state of Mississippi, and he negotiated a paid position for Myrlie Evers as the office's secretary. When he was assassinated, she stayed in that home for over a year, where the driveway was a daily reminder of her husband's death. In the summer of 1964, she addressed the NAACP convention at the time when the civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner were missing and not yet discovered murdered. She later moved to California. At the age of 31, she went back to college, working part-time, graduated from Pomona College with a degree in sociology. She pursued justice to try to get the conviction of her husband's killer. It was a 3-decade commitment. He was finally convicted in 1994. The Evers home is now a national landmark. Its location on a quiet street shows you how danger can be everywhere. Mrs. Evers, and I always call her that, she says, "After all these years, you can call me Myrlie." And I said, "My mouth does not work like that. It's a cultural thing. I do not call her by her first name." She remains beautiful, gracious, and propelled by an invisible life force, a mixture of compassion, curiosity, and righteous anger. Her candor and openness can shock one expecting to encounter a martyr or saint. She is defiantly a whole person. For African Americans, preserving personhood is itself an accomplishment. She talks about her husband this way. She said, "He came along and said, 'You can do whatever you want to do, but keep those boundaries out of the way. You never stop dreaming for something higher and better.'" Medgar was, and I use the first name because that's what she used, was a veteran of World War II, as was my father. When Medgar returned to Mississippi, he decided to confront the rapid prejudice and racism. I came along and learned as we moved forward in the work, first in the Mississippi Delta and then in Jackson. I asked her how she prepared. She said, it was exciting but frightening time. You stared at death every day and you walked, and death walked along with you. But there was always hope, and there were always people who surrounded you to give you a sense of purpose. You try to prepare. You do a little role playing. I personally would put myself in a position mentally where I had just lost my husband. I knew it was coming. I recalled a conversation with Medgar not too long before his assassination. I said to him, I can't live without you. I can't make it without you. And he looked at me and he said, you are much stronger than you think you are. You will be okay. You must believe it. I was a woman who was lonely and afraid, but one who was determined to make it. Everything that I did was based on what I thought Medgar would have wanted and the promises I made to him the night before he was killed. My grandmother said to me, you run as far away from Mississippi as you can without going into the ocean. California became home, and until this day, it still is. The women in lighting the fires of freedom, such as Myrlie Evers, represent authenticity, courage, and purpose. They lit the fires and showed the way. All of them continued to be involved in social justice movements and activities after the height of the civil rights movement. It is my hope that their stories will serve as inspiration, motivation, and instruction for the work that must still be done to make real the ideals of our nation. Authenticity, courage, purpose. I just want to mention that should you want further reading besides Lighting the Fires of Freedom, my recently released book continues to highlight the voices of African American women who speak truth to power and offer hope for the future. And yes, when I get down, I go to the shelf, I read many works, but I read the words of these women who have so much inspired me, and I hope will inspire you. In Blackbird Singing, these are some of the voices you will read about, and you'll read their stories. Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Mary Shad Carey, Ida B. Wells Barnett, the Honorable Shirley Chisholm, Dr. Maya Angelou. Thank you for listening, and I'm so delighted to be able to share this information with you.
Dr. Bell, what a gift. What a gift that you have been to us in this work. You are the balm that we did not know that we needed for this week, for this time. And I can tell just from our community's response that you have touched such a special place in our heart. So thank you for sharing your scholarship, but your heart, your intention, and those words are resonating: authenticity, courage, and purpose. So Tawana Davis asks, where may the book be purchased, The Blackbird Singing?
Oh, yes, both books are available through independent bookstores. If you have one, they're few and far between. Barnes and Noble, and yes, I have to say Amazon. Uh, because they carry the book, both my books actually, and so it's possible to get it there. But um, I always say, please try to see if there's an independent bookstore that will order it for you. But I know that that's a big inconvenience for most people, including me.
Okay, Frank Dobson asked, are either of your books in audio format? Frank is a colleague at Otterbein.
Oh, very good. The first one is Lighting the Fires of Freedom is on Audible. And the person who recorded it did a beautiful job. It's a beautiful job. That Blackbirds uh, is not an audible, but Lighting the Fires of Freedom is.
Dr. Bell, Lorian has stated that she is heartbroken today, as are so many, sad, angry, and full of fear. What words would you share in terms of finding strength, resilience, and hope?
Is that Lauren Alexandra, my my academic advisor who was on my dissertation
It
committee,
it is. It is.
who pushed me toward finishing that one? We can't give up. And that the words of hope to me are, I look at the younger people, and it's not, I have a friend who says it's not about us, it's about the future we're leaving for our children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews. And we have a responsibility, and I take very seriously what Horace Mann said, be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity. I try to win a victory for humanity every day. But the hope is that despite everything, people can't steal our joy. People make light of the attitude or the value of joy. But joy is something that it's not it's from within. It's remembering the fact that we have survived the Middle Passage for Black people, um, despite the wandering in the desert and all these horrible things that have happened to Jews. We have survived. The Japanese. I met Mr. Korematsu, who filed the Supreme Court case that to end Japanese encampments, concentration camps in this country, which is really what they were. And so they and the sense of hope is one thing. You can't give up hope. Derek, my late husband, Derek Bell, of whom I am very proud of, wrote some very stark stories. One, Space Traders, for instance, that you can find on HBO if it's made into a half-an-hour show. But one thing about it, when you read the book, that story is, he has an epilogue that says, hope is hope must be eternal. I'm paraphrasing now. We cannot, it's beyond despair. We don't have time for that. We get down every now and then. That we're human beings. We have to acknowledge that these are tough times right now, and they're going to get tougher. So how do we get out of that? Because we know, first of all, that we are a people of strength, and we can use that to move forward. And we have to take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, mentally. We have to do all of that, but we must survive. We don't have a choice. We must win.
Absolutely beautiful. We have another question from one of our attendees, Mbato Mamse. I hope I am pronouncing and honoring your name correctly. What have been some of your challenges, Dr. Bill, as a Black woman scholar in the United States? And what are your thoughts on how education can be transformed to be a more liberatory journey than a tool that upholds capitalism?
I had a flip response, which is go to Antioch. I was lucky enough to be rescued by Antioch when I had quit school to do civil rights work, among other things. I went back to school, and I have had the privilege of being an Antioch undergrad as well as an Antioch uh, doctor. And so I think we just have to remember that education is a tool. It doesn't make us better than anyone. It gives us an opportunity to to do things of service to other people. I take service very, very seriously. And I think that and also reminded of the fact that my father, who was from rural Georgia, could not read or write like many of the Black men of his era. But guess what? Somehow they were smart enough to work assembly lines, to work in factories because they could take directions. So they had an education that was not a formal education. So what we have to, but they always encourage me and others to get educated, to become educated. I remember when I was walking the 6 blocks to elementary school, they would say things like, "Girl, you better get your education." And I say, they didn't know how to pronounce it. They certainly couldn't spell it, but they knew that education was liberation. Education was liberation because that is one thing that and public schools would not be as good as they are. We can argue about the quality of some public schools, but for Black people, no, we really created the infrastructure for the public education system. And it's amazing that that's what one of the things that this cabal, I don't have nice words to say. I'm trying to clean it up with with my education, uh, that they're trying to destroy because they know that Black people, in spite of everything, have created an educational system, the HBCUs. I mean, brilliant people come up, have been educated that way. And so I think that the what we have to remember is that education has sort of two things, I think. I love learning and I love sharing what I have learned formally. But I also respect the fact that people are educated in different ways, and they have educated me in different ways. And so to take, and I don't take my education for granted.
Absolutely. And you spoke about that in terms of some of the individuals that you interviewed. So I was able to get the question from Lakoya Kato Jesse. There is a current rest revolution being encouraged for Black women. I'm curious how Dr. Bell might respond to this idea at this time. How might you respond to the idea or fact that Black women have saved humanity over and over and over in this country, and we're not entirely interested in doing it again at this time?
Again, we don't have a choice. Unfortunately, I remember seeing one woman being interviewed saying, a young woman, it being interviewed by I get, I'm trying to think of the person, Simone Sanders Thompson, and she was saying, I'm tired of being of saving this country again. And I thought, well, it's sort of self-interest too. Well, other people get the benefit of our labor and our work. And we've got to figure out how to get more of the benefit for Black people and for Black women. But I think that you just can't, we can't opt out. But even with that, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly, but I think even with that, I understand how tired people are. I know I get tired. And I know that we have to figure out how we sustain ourselves in the midst of an onslaught of negative forces. I mean, it's really true. Black women, I'm absolutely amazed, really, at the. I had have a friend, who, when I said to him, a white male, I said, you know, Black women have saved this country and we'll save it. We built the country, we saved it, and we'll save it again. And he said, "You can't say that." I said, "Yes, I can." I said, "Look at it. I mean, look at it's true. It's true." And so and I say we shouldn't have to do that. I'd rather be sitting on my porch, frankly, drinking champagne, but I cannot do that. I do that every now and then. I don't have a porch anymore, but every now and then, you know the point is that you have to take time out and to celebrate. Uh, we have to take time out and to celebrate each other and celebrate the life we have and the diversity of experiences we have. And by that I mean is that many of us have lived. We live a very full life. My attention, my focus on Black women allows me to understand more people, other people's background better. It's not isolating, it's liberating, it's educational. It does that. But when what's that song? If you love yourself, you can love other people. And if you love other people, you can figure out a way that that that's part of the hope phenomenon. I think that's part of the joy phenomenon, that even in the midst of all of this, you know it's like um the very first play I ever saw was The Diary of Anne Frank, one of the very first books I ever read. So I was a teenager, and the fact that she never gave up on people and humanity is something that has always stayed with me. That believes that in spite of all that, in spite of the forces of evil, and they're out there and they're pushing, get thee behind me, Satan. But despite all that, that there are the good people who um, who hid you in their behind their walls in Nazi Germany, who who hid people on the Underground Railroad, who did that. And so we have to remember that there have been ways in which people have found to help other people, and they help themselves. I say, I say uh, that America really needs to break its this is a little stark, really needs to break its murder-suicide pact with MAGA, because it's not good for us and it's not good for them. When you deny when you deny certain kinds of realities, you it's it sets up a false scenario that nobody survives. So what we have to do is just keep going, tell the truth the way we know it, be open to. I'm willing to listen to a little bit, but frankly, I'm not listening to a lot of foolishness. I've decided that that okay, that's enough now. You can deny certain kinds of realities all you want, but after a certain point, I'm not listening. What I need to do is put my energy into how do I save the life of the life and livelihood of people, starting with the Black community. I mean, when we what is it when we have a cold, when America has a cold, we have pneumonia, that kind of thing. Remember that? And that's really true. And so I'm focused on what I have a job, I have a mission, and my mission is to be a force for um without, I don't want to sound arrogant about the mission, but my mission is to be a force for good and to try to do the best I can, so that every day I wake up and I think, what, this is the day the Lord hath made, rejoice and be glad in it. Uh, I'm a bit of a religious nut as well. And I'm putting Christ back in Christianity.
That is absolutely fair to do. I'm going to try to pull us together with a couple questions that we
Okay.
have here, and we certainly want to honor your time, Dr. Bell. How long did it take you to interview the women that you wrote about? And What were the self-care strategies that you learned from them? I got tickled when you said I would love to just be drinking champagne on my porch. I would say bourbon, but that could be a little bit of a self-care strategy. But what were some of the ones that you heard from these incredible women as I've been listening to people try to make sense of what is happening right now? We've been told, look back, there is wisdom, such as you shared, such as in the women, but how long did it take you and what did you learn in terms of their self-care that we may be able to apply in this moment and moving forward?
That's an excellent question. It frankly did not take so long to interview them. What took long, and Lauren will attest to this, what took long is for me writing the dissertation itself and doing other research. But the what I learned from them is that particularly with if you go with Leah Chase, it's not just cooking. She's providing a service and a it's sharing all of these women in their own way shared their lives, and I think that's what I learned from them besides their courage. But also I was talking with um, other people, Judy Richardson, for instance, and we talked about how we used to just dance. We used to dance all night, right? And so we need to just bring some of that. She didn't say this. I don't want to put words in her mouth. But I keep thinking we just need to do that. We need to come up with um, situations in which we are enjoying each other's company, and it can be small, it can be large. Well, what I learned from the women is to really keep going, think outside. It's funny when you think outside of yourself, it also, for them, it seems to be a bit of self-care because it nurtures their spirit, and it nurture and they are they were inspired to do more. And 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 so I'm going to think more about that particular question that you just asked, because I have not given it a lot of thought. But I think um it's they and the honest, and what do I like about them? One of the things, their honesty. When I say authenticity, courage and personality, authenticity is the honesty that they have. And I think uh, that generates a kind of spirit that you don't find everywhere. They are no nonsense. It's not that they aren't fun, but they are like, no, they don't put up with a lot of foolishness. They are about, well, what they appreciate where we are. By that I mean not that they were none of them had intergenerational wealth. No one. But that did not hold them back. That did not stop them. They did not focus on what they didn't have. What they focused on is what they did have, and what they had was their intellect, their courage, their sense of community, how they can and the sense of community. I think it motivates people to think you can't be depressed forever when you're thinking about somebody else and helping them, no matter what the circumstances are. At least that's my thought.
Well, when you capture all of that wisdom and put that in the next book, Lynn Washington, who asked the question, we'll get a shout out for it because there's so much wisdom to be learned there. Dr. Bell, we would just like to honor you. Thank you for capturing this history, this blueprint for us to be able to witness, to just take such joy in knowing that this is a part of our DNA and it is something that we can call upon, not just looking at it from what happened, but how we may use that in this moment and in the time to come. So, thank you for sharing your expertise, everyone. Please join me. You're getting lots of hearts coming through, lots of gratitude from some other individuals in our Q&A, but we are appreciative of it. Everyone, we will send out feedback so you can tell us other information, and if there are other questions that you have that we weren't able to get to, we can see if we can get in touch with Dr. Bell to follow up. Tomorrow, we will continue our activities sponsored by the Truth Racial Healing Transformation Campus Center. We have a social justice summit that will start at 12 o'clock Eastern time, and we'll finish up later in the evening about 5:45, but you can come in and out as your schedule permits. Dr. Bell, were you grabbing something to say before we go? Please have your say.
I was trying to see if there was one particular line, but I couldn't find it. So I I may have to share it with you. I'll share it with you later.
You share it with me, I'll make sure I share it with the community. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming and have a great evening. We hope to see you tomorrow.